Initial Thoughts is a spoiler-free movie review series. All opinions are my own. Hi everyone, welcome back to Initial Thoughts, a series in which we talk about films as and when they are released. Today's film we're talking about is Deadpool and Wolverine, which is directed by Shawn Levy and stars Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman. So here it is, the only major Marvel release this year. One release. After such a plethora of Marvel releases, varying in quality, that has to be said, in the last, well, let's just say a long time. It's been a long time since there's been one Marvel movie a year. Not to mention TV shows. Let's think about last year, for example. It was so overcrowded with so much Marvel. And there was one shining light last year, and that was Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. A brilliant end to a brilliant trilogy. Amidst a, let's say, a low point for the Marvel Cinematic Universe as a whole. And that is basically down to, I think, for me personally, I would imagine it'd be the same as a lot of you guys, is burnout. Because there is a lot of content to consume, and truthfully, if we're being really harsh about it, there isn't as much love and craft, or love of the craft and passion for these projects that comes through on the screen. And movies like The Marvels, movies like Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, for example, come to mind from last year alone. We had something like The Eternals not too long ago as well. And movies like that seem to me, and it comes across very much like, well, we've got the Marvel formula sorted. We've got what we need. We just can get a bunch of actors together. Let's get it based on a certain comic book element, and let's go. Let's keep adding, and not actually building on the quality too much. Just wanting us to care about more and more and more and more and more and more and more. But the big thing that I think has been lacking in so much of these, and actually that was so present at the forefront of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and actually in the other, and I know it's easy to say this, but even in the movie we'll be talking about today, they reference this. Since Endgame, there has been a severe dip in quality. However, there has been, I would say, two real shining lights since that. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, as I've already mentioned, and Spider-Man No Way Home. Two movies that clearly felt like a lot of love, and actually two third entries in trilogies. And that again ties us to what we're talking about today. Because in Deadpool and Wolverine, we're coming at a point where there is definitely a burnout. Maybe not to everybody, but there's certainly an online feeling of, okay, can we take a breather with this? Can we calm down with Marvel and superheroes in general? Because it's not like DC, which have just ended their universe. The Sonyverse, Jesus, don't get me started on that with things like Madam Web. The only real shining light, and the only reason I don't really mention this is because it's its own kind of pocket thing, completely different, I would imagine, to everything else, is of course the Spider-Verse movies, which are both absolutely masterpieces at what they are, and I have no doubt the third in that trilogy will be fantastic. But let's talk about today's third entry in a trilogy, Deadpool and Wolverine. And the best part about coming into Deadpool and Wolverine was, I looking at Deadpool 2, for example, because the first Deadpool is so much fun, and I think Deadpool 2 really, it was quite, I wouldn't say emotional, but it certainly had a lot more emotion, a lot more heart to it. And I think it's probably my favourite story of the bunch. The first one, the best part about the first Deadpool and the Deadpool experience of the first one was this character shouldn't really work with what we know so well about superhero films. And the cliches and the kind of tropes that they're kind of tied to in nearly every walk of superhero film. They have an origin story, they have rules they abide by, etc., etc. And Deadpool kind of throws that all out the window, quite literally in fourth wall breaking, and it was such a noble concept then. And also, we didn't really know much about Ryan Reynolds, as he wasn't the household name he is now. When he then went on to do other movies where he plays Ryan Reynolds, when I think of his appearance, he appeared at the start of like Hobbs and Shaw, and he played Ryan Reynolds. he was in Detective Pikachu, and he was playing Pikachu, voiced by Ryan Reynolds, being Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool, but not swearing. So, by that point, and by where we are now, that trope has kind of been played out a little bit. But when done right, the Ryan Reynolds humour can be done so well. And I think both the first and second film are really, really enjoyable times. Because when the MCU was so bogged down, and maybe bogged down is the wrong terminology to use, but when it was kind of building to bigger and bigger things, of course, Infinity War on the horizon and everything like that, Deadpool 2 was quite an enjoyable, refreshing change of pace. And that always kind of had in my head, when they do Deadpool 3, whatever that may be, I'm very much excited for it. Then, things go pretty quiet, we don't hear much, and then we get confirmed that it's going to be Deadpool and Wolverine. Hugh Jackman coming back after what I believe might just be the strongest standalone, if you can call it that, Marvel film there's ever been in Logan. I think that film is an absolute... It's as good as it can be for what it's trying to be. That movie is so good. And I mean, I don't need to tell you how good Logan is. If you've seen it, you know how good it is. And in that film, there is that emotional tie of, that ended so well, do we really want to tamper with that? But then we do kind of love... we do. We love Hugh Jackman in this role, and he brings so much. You add to his dynamic, the Wolverine dynamic with the Deadpool dynamic. I was sold. As I'm sure you were, as I'm sure everybody, when they first seen the trailers and things, they go, this is going to be so much fun. And going into Deadpool and Wolverine, that was really what I wanted. And now this is something that I will get into when I'm talking about kind of my pros and cons for Deadpool and Wolverine. But something I want to talk about is what I really kind of tie into what I mentioned there about Marvel, and it's focused a lot on narratives. I think of something like Eternals, which is very narrative driven. It's not much fun, but it's very narrative driven. I think of the Marvels. Again, I wouldn't say the most fun movie, and actually the narrative isn't that strong either. And that's kind of... I could go on. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania kind of relies on, well, this is Kang, so what's going to happen, what's this going to lead to, rather than the movie we're seeing this current moment. The narrative and the story work that has been put into recent Marvel films, again, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is completely different. That is clearly such a passion project for everyone involved, and that does not fall into this category. But near enough everything else does. Because, and I've heard a lot of people, well, certainly early indications of Deadpool and Wolverine have been good. People seem to have really enjoyed the film, and I'll say it straight out, I really enjoyed this film. I didn't love it, but I thought it was such an enjoyable time. And I'll get into why as we talk, but just to kind of tie off that story and narrative side of things, the reason I mention that is because a lot of people are really... They're really being harsh to Deadpool and Wolverine because they said the story is all over the place. And I'm not going to disagree with them. However, if what you're looking for is a really tightly written narrative and a really complex and deeply emotional story, in a Deadpool movie, especially a Deadpool movie that comes at a time when Marvel has tried that. They have tried to make us care about these characters that we didn't even know. These are two characters that we care emotionally about already. We root for these characters. We have such enjoyment and such history with both of these characters in different walks of, times. Hugh Jackman going back to the early 2000s, and then the first Deadpool probably is, well, it's got to be at least 10 years ago now. About 10 years ago. So it's been quite a while. And I think with a lot of people, and these kind of early... And of course, that's not everybody's opinion, and I'll kind of explain why that isn't really mine either. But I can get why, if you went into this expecting a really tight narrative that's going to make so much sense and everything is tight-knit, and, Deadpool and Wolverine is a masterpiece of cinema in regards to storytelling, it isn't. It simply is not. And frankly, it's the worst in the sense of story of the three. However, it might just be the most enjoyable. Because on a first watch, and of course it's initial thoughts, so it is the first watch, and I think maybe on rewatches once the jokes dry up a little bit, which you can kind of attribute to the other two films too, Because a lot of them are shock factor. A lot of them are, oh my god, I can't believe you said that, in the sense of the context, etc., etc. But something that kind of gets understated sometimes, especially by people that talk about movies. Sometimes maybe I do this, and maybe I am guilty of this sometimes. But sometimes movies can just be fun. You can just go and have an enjoyable time. Don't think about it too seriously. And that happens to... There's certain films that I can't do that for, because they're just angling for that so much. But in Deadpool and Wolverine, there's so much to latch on to here. There's so much fun. There's so much over-the-top enjoyment. And again, what I said there when I compared it to something like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 and the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy as a whole, or even, you know, with John Watts and the Tom Holland Spider-Man films, you have a clear direction and you have a clear goal. You have a clear aim as a director and everybody involved. Now, this isn't the clearest story, and it's pretty much a mess, but it seems intentional. It seems like it's just throw everything at the wall. And yes, there's cameos. Yes, it kind of lives cameo to cameo at sometimes. But I didn't at any point of Deadpool and Wolverine feel that this film felt cheap, or that, you know, I think once I realised what we were in for, I think this is probably the best way I can describe it. Once you get about 35 to 45 minutes into this film, and once you've set up the stakes, once Deadpool and Wolverine are together, and once we know what direction we're going in, and what may come from this adventure, if you could call it that, it's just such a fun time. If you stop to think about it too much, you stop to think about, well, how did that work, and how does this work, and how does that connect, and that doesn't actually make sense. You could do that all day with this film. And admittedly, you could probably do that a lot through Deadpool 2 as well, and Deadpool 1. Definitely not as much as this one. But what I said there, and I couldn't really get away from this when I walked out with such a smile on my face after watching this, I just had such a laugh watching this. It's such... And again, you know, and you know what you're going to hear me saying if you've been on the channel for a while, and with comedy being so subjective. But this had so much... There was multiple funny moments, laugh out loud moments. And it probably is the funniest film I've seen this year so far in the cinema. Admittedly, we haven't been, you know, awash with comedies and films of that nature. But I think this is far and away been the most I've laughed at the cinema so far. And that wasn't just me. You know, nearly the whole theatre I was in was the same. And I would imagine that's probably the same for most people up and down the country. You know, you could go into this with your real film bro head on and go, well, actually, that doesn't make sense. And this character was pretty shallow. And this was it. Yeah, we can do that all day long. And I will go into some of those details before I finish talking about this and rating it, etc. But I just want to say, straight off the bat, this is a fun experience to watch. If you're in Marvel, if you're sick of Marvel, if you love it, if you love these characters, if you're not fussed on these characters, I think there's something for near enough every demographic in that way. If you're so... I think if you're one of these people that a lot of people I know are like this, I'm sure some of you guys would be the same. You go, I haven't watched a Marvel movie in a good while. Or I've maybe just watched a select one or two. Maybe Spider-Man, maybe Guardians, and they've both been good. But you've not seen Eternals, or Shang-Chi, which I quite enjoyed, or and Wasp, Quantumania, or, you know, or the Marvels, you know, the list goes on. I think there's something for any kind of person who's been in or out of the Marvel journey so far. And I think that's part of it, because you'll get self-deprecating humor, but you'll also get just a really enjoyable story about two characters who really bounce off each other so well. And in Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman, two what seems like two real good friends in real life, for that to translate into screen and have so much fun playing these characters' games, again, two characters that they clearly have such love for. You know, for Ryan Reynolds, Deadpool kind of kickstarted his real... I know he had been in a few movies before that, but Deadpool was really the one that put him on the map. And for Hugh Jackman, Wolverine was probably the same. Maybe there was a few films around that time, but it was kind of the first real main... It was really the thing that put Hugh Jackman on the map as a household name. And then there was a lot of films to come after that that would really cement that case. But I don't know that I don't know that I've seen both of these actors have as much fun in a film as this. You know, because certainly Hugh Jackman in such serious roles. And Hugh Jackman is a really fantastic actor. You know, something like Prisoners is probably something... It's probably the one that I could harken back to the most. I think that's his best performance ever. He's a real brilliant actor. When I think of other things, you know, Greatest Showman or Les Mis, he certainly has that kind of range too. And while Ryan Reynolds doesn't have certainly that level of what you would say, he doesn't have those level of performances under his belt, Ryan Reynolds kind of defines a lot of Hollywood comedy at the moment in a lot of ways. If there's a funny role or even a funny cameo or anything like that, he seems to almost be the go-to guy at this point. And that can't really be understated, because yes, he may not be a potentially Oscar-winning actor. I can't see that really ever happening, but what he is probably one of the more fun actors working today, if that makes much sense. And I do think that both of them have such a fun dynamic, plus you add into the mix a lot of surprises, a lot of twists and turns that with different characters and things like this that really make this such a fun experience. Yes, the story is pretty nonsensical for large periods of this, but you're laughing that much. It's not really... you can't really sit and critique it too much when you're having that much fun. And I think that's really where... Because I really wanted to be as fair as I could to this movie. Because if for just a few minutes, I'll go film bro mode and I'll talk about the things that really doesn't work. And the things that don't work is, of course, the narrative. I've said that a good few times now. You've heard me say that. Other things are, say, the villain. Emma Corrin, I am a massive fan of. I think her performance as Diana in The Crown, particularly in Season 4, was brilliant. Really brilliant. If you've watched that show, you know what I'm talking about. She is a brilliant actress. I think she was criminally underutilized as Cassandra Nova in this film, but I don't think she's that bad. And there's certainly, I mean, the villains in Marvel have kind of took a dip for a long time. There's obviously the exceptions, of course there is, but villains haven't really been their strong point. She isn't the worst, but it is probably the most forgettable part of the film, and that is a shame, because, as I say, I'm a big fan of hers, and I hope that this main stage exposure that she gets from being in this film gets her some big roles, because she, I think, is a criminally underappreciated actress, and I think, you know, she could have done a lot more in this. She's fine. She has some funny moments herself, but the villain is definitely the most forgettable. The other thing to kind of talk about as a negative, and I kind of hinted at it there, and again, this does also apply to the first two Deadpool films, so this is not unique to just the third one. I don't know how much this film would hold up in a rewatch. As good. I really enjoyed it the first time round, and this is my initial thought, so it will be a high score, and it'll be a deservedly high score in my mind. But I think if I came to this maybe in a year's time, maybe not even a year's time, maybe 6 months' time from now, and I watched it again, and I've heard most of the jokes, I've heard all the jokes, and I remember most of the jokes, I don't know that the kind of lacking story would be able to carry me along for as fun of as fun of a trip as the first two can on rewatches. Particularly the second one. I think the second one has the most rewatchable value, and I think that still holds up after this third film. But when I think about seeing all three films in cinema and coming out of it and how much I enjoyed them, this is the one I've enjoyed the most on first watch. And that's where I land. I do think it's probably the weakest of the three, but by the teeniest margin. Because as we come to rating time here, if I was rating... Well, for the first film, it's an 8.5. The second film, it's also an 8.5. This film, the fairest I can be, is an 8 out of 10. I had such fun with this. Deadpool and Wolverine is such a blast. And I know I could talk about so many other things. You know, again, I keep using that term, film bro stuff, but at the end of the day, this is a really enjoyable time. If you've been along for the Marvel ride, if you're in any way sick of Marvel, still rooting for Marvel, anywhere along that, you know, spectrum of things, you will get a lot out of this film. And I think Deadpool and Wolverine will definitely be a contender by the end of the year for the funniest film I see this year. And definitely one of the most enjoyable times I've had in the cinema this year. Is it the best film on a structure point, on a narrative point? Absolutely not. It's actually one of the weaker in a funny way. But it's just hard not to enjoy this. And that was really where, you know, if I was being hypercritical just for the sake of it, you know, with a few of the things I mentioned there, I could go, well, actually, it's nowhere near. It's definitely an 8 out of 10. It's definitely an 8 out of 10. Deadpool and Wolverine is such fun. The people in it and involved with it seem to have had so much fun. And actually, that's something, I know I mentioned it there, but with Endgame kind of an easily directable point of that's a cut-off. And so the best films since then have been Shang-Chi, which I really enjoyed, but, you know, was its own kind of thing. I don't know that I have much faith in the second installment of Shang-Chi, but I really enjoyed the first one. No Way Home, I think, is a brilliant film. It is so much more than just nostalgia. It is nostalgia in the most rewarding way. Guardians of the Galaxy 3, which is one of the most beautiful ends to a superhero trilogy there will ever be. I absolutely love that film. And now we have Deadpool and Wolverine, which, in line with the other two films, it very much achieves such fun. I know I've said that word literally a million times now, but I could, you know, I can't think of another word that describes it more perfectly. You go into this with a bit of, in some kind of ranging level of burnout of Marvel and superheroes and all that. The other superhero movie I've seen this year is Madam Web, for example. And if you heard me talk about that film, whew, that is the stinker of all stinkers. What a terrible film. And that, for me, made me think, will I carry that into future superhero films? And then I get to Deadpool and Wolverine and I go, no, they just don't have the quality. But when they're done right, like this, and yes, it isn't done right in some aspects, but for what it's going for, audience enjoyment, audience laughter, emotional investment in the characters, in the leading characters, and staying true to what it is, you know, and what has been established in the previous two films. Yes, the story isn't as strong, but Deadpool and Wolverine is an absolute blast. And I know that sounds so cliche, but as far as summer films go, I don't think you'll have more enjoyment in a cinema. I hope. Well, I'm happy to be proved wrong, but we're about the middle of the summer period here. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a film more enjoyable, certainly on first watch, than Deadpool and Wolverine. 8 out of 10, a really fun time, and honestly, a film that I hoped for a good lot of. You know, I hoped I would get this. And I'm happy to say I did. Happy to say I got the enjoyment I wanted. That recapture of the fun that the previous two Deadpool films had, plus a certain level of emotion that Logan had. It really isn't a Logan sequel. If you're going in expecting that, it really isn't that. But it still is damn good. It still is damn good. Deadpool and Wolverine's a blast, guys. I would recommend you go and see it. Try not to get it spoiled for yourself. There is a lot of things to spoil. I'm sure if you're on TikTok or Twitter or anything in the last day or so, you've probably seen some stuff already, even accidentally, which I hate. I hate whenever people get this stuff and they want to spoil it straight away for other people. That always frustrates me. But yeah, if you think this is a film you'll enjoy, I would definitely recommend giving it a go. So yeah, that has been my review for Deadpool and Wolverine. The only Marvel movie this year, and it's a good one. So maybe the case is for Marvel going forward, less is more. And let's not oversaturate us with too much, because there has been far, far, far too much, and not half the quality that it needed to be for us to keep us invested. But this is a good, hopefully, re-entry point of quality. Let's see if they can build on this. They've got a good opportunity to do that. But yeah, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day for listening to me talking about yet another movie. If you enjoyed this video, I really appreciate if you leave a like, let me know. If you want to stick around, subscribe for more like this. I'm also on all socials. If you want to follow me at TikTok, I'm very active over there. TikTok, I'm probably more active on there. The biggest releases go here on the YouTube channel, but the TikTok is probably more or less every other week, which isn't a set rule, but I'm just thinking on movie releases, there's most films go on there with the biggest releases of the year coming here on the YouTube. So if you want to hear a lot more of me, or if you're sick of my voice, that's fine, just come at the odd YouTube video. But if you want to go over the TikTok, there's a lot on there. I'm also on Letterboxd, and that's probably the best way to follow me, because I'll be logging each movie I see. Then there's a link to the review, whether it's on TikTok, whether it's on YouTube, or if it's a movie I see that doesn't really warrant a review and I just want to write a few words about it, maybe a few paragraphs, that's also on the Letterboxd too. So I would recommend checking me out there. Or if you're just stopping around for this video, thanks so much for taking the time out of your day, as I say, to listen to me talking about this. And if you do stick around, I will hopefully see you in the next one. Bye guys. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Before you go, here are some of my other videos. For updates and information on upcoming videos, the best place to find us is my Twitter. Much love everyone.